Hey, thanks for coming back to the channel. Today, we've got a little collection of pistols out here, and we're going to talk about the 25 automatic, a little bit of history of the 25 auto, and some of the guns that have chambered that cartridge over the years. We've got a little selection of stuff here. Two of them are from my personal collection, and then one we had at the shop at the range, at BTO range in Conroe. So the 25 auto cartridge, you don't really see it that much anymore, but it was a big deal when it was introduced back in 1905. It was developed and invented by John Browning, amongst many other cartridges and many other gun designs, but he introduced it in 1905 as a cartridge for the FN model of 1905 semi-automatic pistol in 25 auto. So during that time period, Browning was selling his patents to FN and to Colt. And Colt would bring out basically that same pistol, the FN 1905 or 1906. It's called both in Europe depending on patent date versus release date. But in 1908, Colt brought it out as a Colt 1908 Pocket, or the model N is in November. And that's this gun right here. This is a Colt model 1908 in 25 auto. This particular gun dates back to 1938, this particular gun. It was in line in Colt from 1908 through 1949. So grip safety, and it's got the thumb safety here on this side. So this gun produced by Colt through the World War II years, not much production during World War II. This is the black box that it would have came in 1938 with the paperwork and all that cool stuff. So a neat little gun. And what we look at with these little Colt guns, and there's a lot of fakery that happens with these little Colt 1908s. And I've seen a number of them, especially relating to wartime production guns or guns that are faked to look like they were issued. Colt did issue pocket pistols. The General Officer's pistol, for example, the Model M, the 1903 pocket hammerless gun was issued and was U.S. government marked. And there are stories about these little 25s being carried by members of the OSS and other clandestine services during the World War II and during that time period, but they were never U.S. marked. I mean, why would they mark a gun for a clandestine service? Why would they mark that U.S. property? But nonetheless, you see some fakery going on, and people will put U.S. markings on a more beat up Colt 1908 and try to pass it off as something highly collectible, and that just if you see a U.S. property marked gun, just assume it to be fake, unless there's some kind of amazing provenance otherwise. So, why was a 25 auto developed? Well, in the early 1900s, when it was developed, they were looking for a small pocket pistol, and 22 long rifle was kind of the go-to cartridge for something along that line. However, the 22 long rifle cartridge with its outside lubrication, non-jacketed lead bullets, extremely unreliable in these really small frame little pistols. So Browning developed a centerfire cartridge, 25 caliber, shorter. It was far more reliable than the 22 long rifle and proved to be actually a workable cartridge to give relatively the same ballistics as 22 long rifle in these little small pistols. So what are you going to find when you look at these guns? On these guns that are FN marked and the European market guns like this little Browning, for example, or this Galisi in 25, the European designation for the 25 ACP round is 6.35 millimeters. So you'll see it marked 6.35 Browning, you'll see them just marked 6.35 or 6.35 in some various manner of marking, and that indicates the 25 ACP cartridge. Sometimes they'll have it completely drawn out, the 6.35 by 15 R. The R stands for rimmed because the 25 auto cartridge is not a true rimless cartridge. It is semi-rimmed. So it's got a small rim larger than the case body, and the cartridge is actually designed to headspace on the case rim and not the case mouth. And in fact, in Europe, because of this rimmed design, there were several small revolvers that were actually chambered for the 25 ACP round, the Velo Dog style revolver, designed for bicyclists and very small pocket revolvers chambered in 25 ACP. That idea never really caught on in the States, and 25 ACP is generally considered to be a semi-auto pistol round here in America at least. So the little Colt was produced again from 1908 through 1949. So very little production during the war, and mainly just a cleanup in parts after the war. And what Colt found after the war, as certainly as it got into the late 40s, is there was a ton of inexpensive pocket pistols coming across from Europe. Astra in Spain was making them. Bernardelli was making pistols. Galisi was making pistols. Italy and Spain and just a number of countries were exporting 25 ACP pistols to the States, and the production cost of the Colt was too high. They couldn't make the gun and sell it to compete. So Colt ended up going to a company in Spain called Astra, A-S-T-R-A, and they were going to have the Astra Cub, and I think we have one at the range, but it's in 22 short. They're going to have the Astra 25 ACP rebranded as the Colt Junior, and then there was, and that's worth a whole video in and of itself because of some of the problems with that whole relationship between Colt and Astra and another company in the States called Firearms International that ended up picking up that project. So FN had this gun as 1905 or 1906. Colt has it as the 1908 Pocket. Well, in 1931, John Browning had died a few years earlier. In 1931, FN's chief designer, Dieudonné Save, and I probably completely butchered that name. My French is hideous. But they developed a smaller pistol based on this design. They deleted the grip safety. They enlarged the actual thumb safety itself to make it more usable. And the Baby Browning was born. It was not officially called the Baby Browning for some time. It was a name that just kind of stuck, and Browning eventually sort of adopted it. And this little gun was in production from 1931, and it was imported into the United States by Browning from the early 50s until 1968. It was produced by FN and sold from 31 throughout, even into the 70s, and I think maybe even the early 80s. But production of this gun was one thing, importation of the gun is another. In 1968, the Gun Control Act was passed, and among a multitude of other things that particular piece of legislation did, it banned importation. In fact, it generally banned importation of firearms pretty much period, unless they met specific exemptions. And one of those exemptions was the sporting exemption. So in order to qualify to be imported under the sporting exemption, the gun had to accrue a certain amount of points on a worksheet, and that's based on size and features and material that it's made out of and things of that nature. And the little Browning 25 just did not make the cut. So the gun could no longer be imported after the adoption and passage of that act. So we lost one of the highest quality 25 automatics that was ever made. So FN turned to a company called Precision Small Parts in Canada to start making this gun, and the frames were going to be made in the U.S. to avoid the legality, and the parts were other parts, sliding, etc., were made in Canada. And for one reason or another, the project never just got off the ground. There was some like 40,000 guns that were supposed to be ordered for delivery to Austria, and the State Department wouldn't allow them to be exported. It was a whole big mess, and that was the end of that. And then the company regrew itself as PSA, and the gun was reborn again for a few years. In the meantime, there were some unlicensed copies of this gun made by a company called Bauer in Michigan that marketed the Fraser 25 and the Bauer 25, which is a fairly close copy. There are some changes to avoid patent issues on the gun. So the Gun Control Act of '68 really squashed the Browning, and it also squashed this little guy. This is a Galesi, Galesi, 25 auto. This gun was also made in '66, same year as this gun, in Italy. That's the original factory box and in label, and we've got the little paperwork in there and everything. So these are actually serviceable little guns. They're not the really cheapy guns like the RG-26 or things of that nature that were coming across from Germany. But these little Galesi guns, there's a whole series of them. This is a 503B. They made them all the way up to the 517. There are some heavily engraved versions of this gun that are out there that are really collectible. But again, 1968, they're done. So what happened after the Gun Control Act of 1968? Well, there was a big void. A company called Firearms International in Washington, D.C., a company called Firearms Import and Export, or FIE, in Miami started producing versions of that Astra-based, or that pistol based on that Astra Cub. And then, most notably, a man by the name of George Jennings created a gun called the Raven 25 automatic. He was out there in California and created the Raven. And I don't have one. We normally do have one floating around, believe it or not, but don't have one now. And that gun really is worth a video in and of itself because of all of the guns that it spawned, like the Lorcan and the Jennings and the Brico and the Davis and all of that. And it's interesting to me how those all dovetail together with the Jennings family and ex-wives and people like that. So we'll do a video on that probably, hopefully in the near future when we get a decent representative of the brand. So the 25 auto, today you don't really see that. I mean, there are still 25 autos produced. Beretta produces a 25 auto in the States, but mainly it's 22 autos. Taurus has produced 25 autos. They're all produced in the States. Even though Taurus is a Brazilian brand, the guns are produced here in the States in Bainbridge, Georgia. And Berettas are now being produced in Tennessee. It used to be Maryland, but now it's in Tennessee. So there are some 25 autos still being made, but the reason they kind of went away, and you could lay it at the feet of Keltec if you wanted to, because they're now pistols not much larger than this baby Browning, but chambered in .32 and even .380 ACP. So much more potent caliber. In a gun that's not much larger than the 25. So the 25 has kind of gone by the wayside. The ammunition is a little expensive when you can find it. And the ammunition is kind of anemic. The 50 grain full metal jacket ball, which is a traditional load for the 25 auto, has very poor stopping power. Now there are some higher performance loads for 25 auto. Hornady even makes a critical defense load in 25 auto. It's going to be better than ball, but it's not going to be as good as any .380 ACP load for sure. So that was kind of the demise of the little gun. They can be difficult to shoot. There's not enough room to get fingers to get a good grip on these little guns. But they're kind of cool. They're neat. It's an interesting collector field if you wanted to collect small pocket pistols. Some people call them mouse guns if you want, but it's a valid collecting genre, these little pocket pistols, because there's literally so many variations, and they're often fairly decorative, like this little lightweight Browning. This little guy here, I failed to mention it, it's a 1966 gun, fairly rare version of the baby Browning. It has the aluminum frame, it's got the chrome over nickel slide. There are only two, almost all baby Brownings are blue. The only ones that aren't were the Renaissance and engraved guns and this version, the lightweight version. So what would you look at when you're evaluating a quality 25 auto? Let's take a look at this little Colt. So a little Colt, I mean, we always go back to the three things we always talk about: originality, scarcity, and condition, right? So we can look at the markings, especially on a Colt. the Rampant Colt, this guy right here, the Rampant Colt horse, it's impossible or virtually impossible to polish this, to refinish it without losing some of the detail on that horse. So looking at the quality of the markings throughout the gun, I'm 100% convinced this is original. The condition is outstanding, and we look at condition on this gun based on the case coloring that's remaining. The case color on the grip safety, the thumb safety, and the trigger is all there. So the gun looks like it might be a sock drawer gun where somebody bought the gun and stuck it in the box in the sock drawer, and there it lived, until it found its way into my sock drawer, I guess. Certainly in one of my gun safes, but that's a high condition gun. And the 1908 Colt is not particularly scarce, but it is scarce in that condition. So that would be very definitely a great example of the 1908 Colt. The same thing with this little Browning. Again, if you see one that's nickel, it doesn't have an aluminum frame, something's wrong. It's been re-nickeled. So we're looking at the markings. They're all fine. The gold trigger is original. It's supposed to be that way. These grips are original. It's supposed to be that way only on this model. These grips can be retrofitted to other little baby Brownings, and that would be incorrect, but it's correct for this model. Little black Browning pouch is correct. So we have high condition, we have relative scarcity on this gun, so that would be a buy for a collector. It's not for sale, it's mine. Just saying. This little gun here is not, excuse me, the Galeese is not as highly collectible as Colt or Browning. It just doesn't have the name for it, but the condition is kind of what sets this gun apart. Again, we're 100% convinced of the originality. The polishing marks that are visible underneath that are original to when it was new. The proof marks are what they should be. How we date these Italian guns is this proof marking right here, this Roman numeral XXII. There's charts available. You can look and see that's a proof date from when it went through the proof house in Italy. So that'll be 1966. There's serial number charts on the Browning, serial number charts on the Colt, but on the Italian guns, you go by the proof dates. They'll all have, sometimes they're under the grip, sometimes they're visible. You have to find them, but that's the proof date. So they're not scarce at all. There's a ton of them made, and there's a ton of different variants. So again, scarcity relative to condition. It's unusual to find one in the box with the paperwork. So that would be a good buy. For someone collecting, I don't know anybody that collects Galeeses necessarily, but people that collect the little pocket pistols, that would be an interesting thing. So it's a good way. These can get expensive, but this kind of stuff here, you can collect amass a really decent collection of interesting little guns with history behind them. And the history kind of goes back to that Gun Control Act of '68. That piece of legislation was introduced and passed based on all of the high-profile assassinations and what have you that occurred during the '60s, the Kennedys and Martin Luther King and so on, but none of whom were shot, by the way, with an imported small pistol. I mean, Robert Kennedy was shot with an Iver Johnson revolver, U.S.-made gun. So I don't know. The importation kind of stopped because of that. But it cost us a lot of guns. It cost us a Walther PPK. That's why the PPK-S was invented, to meet the points for the importation criteria. PPKs now are made stateside. So fortunately, a lot of manufacturers were able to do that. If you get a German-made PPK, they're all collectible now. They're all pre-68. So. Anyway, the 25 Auto, and we may revisit some of these guns. There's a lot more history to the Colt and the Browning that we haven't gone into. We may revisit that on a later episode, but in general, the 25 Auto, you don't see them that much anymore, which is a shame. I mean, it's a valid little cartridge to do what it does. So by all means, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel. If you have any ideas or models that you would like us to try to get a hold of and do an episode on, please let us know. We'd be happy to try to accommodate that. And as always, thanks for your time. I appreciate it.